80s sci-fi anime, sleek metal spaceships, neon blue all over the damn place. These are the things that sustain me. This is where I live. Sonic Team blessed us with Phantasy Star Online in the year 2000, and it's one of the first proper online RPGs for consoles. Now, I wouldn't know about any of that myself because I played it offline, but let me tell you, it's still an absolute treat for the eyes and ears. And it's worth mentioning that if you're new to the series, this makes for a great jumping on point, since it's a pretty hard reboot and doesn't require any prior knowledge about the first 4 mainline entries. This particular one starts with a character creation menu, and once we decide whether we want to be a Hunawial, Rakasial, or any other class with an equally sensible name, we get dropped straight into the action here in the Principal. This is our cool control room for the game, and it's full of scientists and human council type people who are all very interested in unearthing the secrets of this newly discovered planet, Ragol. Essentially, our home planet is no longer habitable, and so we're looking for a new place to chill. Although, since this spaceship, Pioneer 2, is essentially a floating cyberpunk city full of dope neon buildings and flying cars, I don't quite know why we would ever want to leave. But for some reason we do. Resource scarcity, I guess. Also, Pioneer 1, which went ahead of us to scout the planet, has gone missing, and most notably, the legendary Red Ring Rico, who was leading the scout party, is nowhere to be seen. Everyone is all very sad that she's MIA, so guessing she must be pretty based, and that there comprises our main mission. Explore the planet, report back on the flora and fauna, and try to find a Red Ring Rico. Along the way, we'll join the Hunters Guild and pick up a ton of missions, meeting all sorts of different folk. Some of whom want to help and some who want to exploit the prime real estate of this planet. And there's even a Burning Rangers mission if you have the relevant Dreamcast DLC. Now that story's nice and all, but it's pretty basic and sparse. It just provides us with a loose framework and a reason why we're here. What else we got going on? The art direction is sublime and conjures everything from the pod houses of Dragon Ball to the cyber cities of Akira to the badass weapons and armour of Venus Wars. All the zones are fairly linear and corridor based, but you don't really feel it since so much love was put into the visuals. For instance, the imaginatively titled Forest 1 isn't just a forest. It has these little speeder bikes and force field gates and a residential area with the super clean alabaster flooring and the aforementioned Dragon Ball buildings. It's extremely comfy and inviting even with all the boomers hanging around. The zones are very varied too and follow a basic theme of digging deep into the core of the planet. From the lush forest with its towers and houses, we then venture into the volcanic caves beneath the earth, which brings with it a whole new host of monsters to fight. Once we're done there, we get to easily the most aesthetically pleasing area of the game, the mines, with all the cyber blue a Dreamcast enjoyer could hope for, and looking absolutely nothing whatsoever like a mine. Huge credit to Theonine 3D for this beautiful VR footage, by the way. If you guys want to see more of this kind of stuff, not just for PSO but for many classic games, I have dropped a link to their channel in the description, and so go show them some love because they are truly doing God's work. As you've likely noticed by this point, the soundtrack for this game is an all-out bop. It has that big proggy synth stuff a la Jeff Wayne, Jean-Michel Jarre, etc, and it sets a neat futuristic feel. It's enormously spacious, very clean, which is something that's also true of the game itself. So here's the big question, I suppose. How does it play? I won't lie to you. Much like Morrowind, another favourite RPG of mine, the world is beautiful and it's a joy to explore, but the combat is pretty rough. I think that has to do with the limitations of this being an early online game. They had to account for a lot of traffic on the servers and so had to keep things pretty streamlined and basic with the fighting. In principle, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the 3-hit combo you will invariably resort to with your chosen weapon eventually loses some of its luster. We get a few cool spells to break things up a bit, but we're not exactly approaching the Batman Arkham level of fluid action. I will say that the customizable inventory was pretty ahead of its time though. In modern games we take hotkey and stuff for granted, but this was pretty nifty for 2000. These big icons here in the bottom right correspond to your bottom 3 face buttons, and then if you hold the R trigger down it switches over to another tab which is also customizable. It's just nice quality of life stuff. Which is more than I can say for the bosses. These motherfuckers are merciless. They aren't necessarily tricky in a Dark Souls sort of a way, but they're just mega damage sponges. Again, I suspect that it's because they were intended to be treated as raid encounters for you and your online party, but as a single player encountering these bastards offline, they just take ages to clear. Whereas once I had learned Ornstein and Smo's patterns, I could have them dead within a few minutes. It doesn't matter how much I study Dirole, he will always have 6,000 hit points. So my options are grind for weapons or grind out the encounter. It doesn't ruin the overall fun by any means, since there are only 4 boss encounters in the base game, but it's definitely worth being apprised of. This is Sonic Team in their prime. The Sonic team who had just given us Burning Rangers and Sonic Adventure. Both games with super fun movement mechanics. You don't get that here. In itself, that isn't really a major blow since the landscapes are fairly flat and linear, and no platforming is actually needed, but it would have been nice to have some variety. Since I've already referenced it, in Morrowind you could vary up your traversal by crouching for the sneaky times or levitating for the wizard times and all sorts of other fun stuff. Phantasy Star Online keeps it simple, with just walk and run. Which again, I'm guessing is something to do with the limitations of online gaming at the time, but they improved massively upon this element in the latest entry, PSO2 New Genesis, which for the life of me I don't really know why we're not just calling PSO3, since it is a totally separate game from PSO2 with different characters, locations, story, mechanics. Now in this one we really are focusing on cool flashy fights a la modern Final Fantasy titles, and like I say, it outclasses the original PSO in that regard, because now battling the baddies actually feels fun, and the movement and traversal is super slick too. You got the hovering, the sprinting, the double jumping, the wall jumping, the dodges. You're parkouring all over this bitch. Take a look at this area here. Not only does it look so futuristic that I busted nut up on entry, but also it has this cool timed race to the end thingy going on where your only enemy is the environment. Deep statement. So, it's all about learning those tricky jumps and looking like a sci-fi ninja badass. Honestly, it feels cool as fuck. Oh god, is that how I think it is? New Genesis is still a super beautiful game as you'd expect, and some of the areas do really capture that PSO vibe, like this command center thingy here or these ornate vistas over here. Although, sad to say, a good deal of the areas in this one do just feel like generic open world JRPG stuff, and I guess that's just the times we're living in. I probably won't ever do a full review of this one since it didn't really grab me as much as the original, but it did feel pertinent to mention it here as part of the legacy conversation, and I could definitely recommend it based on the merits that I've mentioned already.
I've just heard horrible shit about this one though.
But back to PSO, the point I am making
is that I personally play games for
a variety of reasons, and most often it is to trundle around and take in the vibe. And so even though the mechanics are pretty clunky, I am still riding hard because of said vibe. Adding to this vibe and imbuing this world with even more life are the quests. They are limited to fairly basic stuff, fetch, escort, talk, but every single one of them has charm and personality and helps to build the world. Take a look at this one here where we're sent to recover a missing mag, these little flying robot guys by my shoulders. And instead we meet this sympathetic android who can communicate with the mags, and she wants to look after them. It's a super sweet mission where we can learn a bit of lore and share some cute character moments. And then we got this one, where we meet this plucky young journalist Noll who believes the government are suppressing the truth about what's really happening on Regal. She wants to get down there and check it out herself. And so we escort her through the forest and she sees all the monsters and janked up machinery and the fact that a lot of good people are dead, and we kinda send her into an existential crisis. Wholesome and good world building. But the main quest is all about tracking down this Red Ring Rico character. And that essentially does just boil down to clearing each zone in order and then a boss at the end of each area.
It's
not the most riveting thing you're ever going to do single player, but I have no doubt it's all good fun if you have some online buds to battle the bads with you. You also learn about the local animals, the planet, and the general unrest that's going on by finding Rico's logs as you explore. Before we get into any final thoughts here, what say we skate all the way back to 1987 and chill out with Alice on the Sega Master System. That's right, it's Phantastic Star 1. Before I say anything else, listen to this fucking bop. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. And despite its humble 8-bit format, this game looks clean as all heck too. The overworld may be a little bit sparse, but take a look at these pod towns. How about the thrill of these first-person dungeons?
What makes a trip unforgettable?
The fuck?
You'll know it when you feel it.
Your ad's getting through the ad blocker
Make
now. Oh
memories with
yeah,
Get Your
you
Guide.
fucking
Unforgettable travel experiences.
motherfucker. I should probably.
This is my comeback. Start yours at PurdueGlobal.edu.
Yeah, what the fuck? I could probably get rid of it.
Now I know that looks like a 1996 Windows screensaver, but please remember that this was 1987, predating Doom by quite a bit. Being able to explore a pseudo 3D space in first person and having it rendered so goddamn cleanly must have really been a trip at the time. I only got round to the original game this year, and even I was surprised. A little bit of story here for you then. You are Alice Lansdale and you swear to avenge your brother Nero, who's been put to death by the evil King Lashik, this Death Adder looking motherfucker over here. And that's basically it. Now you gotta troll the towns, forests, dungeons, pick up a few homies and start your interplanetary revolution. Pretty dope. Also, anytime you get important plot exposition, such as meeting a new character or whatever, you get these beautiful 80s anime looking panels, and I live for it. The first buddy you're going to get here is Meow, this adorable talking cat thingy, and then we find Odin, this absolute Chad Space Ranger dude. A lot of the game is mainly just grinding, buying upgrades and chatting to townspeople, real RPG 101 shit, but it feels good and satisfying. Despite the sheer amount of random encounters, I actually find this a very relaxing game, and I would recommend it as something you could play at the end of a hard day if you want to chill out. It has some difficult enemy encounters and such, but the music and the presentation are all very soothing. You even get to jump onto a spaceship within the first hour of gameplay, which is nuts when I think about modern games where the tutorial takes you more than an hour. Looking at you, Kojima. I will say that if you're planning on checking this game out, please make sure you get the version with the FM sound, because otherwise, instead of the beautiful lush tunes you've been hearing, you're gonna get this. Ouch. Please do not. On the basis of this video, I am very tempted to say that I love the Phantasy Star franchise, because I certainly do love PSO and the original Master System game. However, it's a big sprawling series with a lot of entries, so I'm going to hold my tongue for now until we get some more reviews under our belt. But next up, I'm pretty interested to check out Phantasy Star Zero for the Nintendo DS and Phantasy Star Universe for the PS2, since both of those kinda took cues from the Dreamcast effort and ran in different directions with it. But for now, my friends, that's about all from me. Take it easy, please like, subscribe, etc., and stay fantastic.
Dude, super nerdy. Fantastic, and maybe Scottish. What the fuck is this?
NixOS has been one of the wildest experiences I've ever had in Linux, but in a good way. And it really is kind of interesting. Now, I initially got started with NixOS and even thought of it, and most times I don't cover weird, obscure distributions, but I got offered a job for $300,000 working for a hedge fund specifically covering NixOS implementation and distribution. So it kind of piqued my interest, and I started looking around and I said, hey, there's a lot of jobs out there for NixOS, but there's not a lot of educational content. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to take 2 weeks, not make any YouTube videos, and I'm just going to hammer through a whole bunch of live streams.
High frequency trading.
Everything in NixOS. So if there is somebody that wants to make a lot of money, they can become a NixOS engineer, use these videos to start with, and then springboard. Now you might be thinking, how is a 10-minute YouTube video going to solve all this? Well, one, NixOS works a lot differently, it's reproducible, and you could probably take this 8-minute video or 10-minute video and reproduce everything you need in my version of NixOS. But I want you to do a deeper dive. And I created a whole bunch of time-stamped long videos for configuration. So if there is something you're missing in NixOS, I guarantee you I covered it in one of these videos. Check out all these. I put timestamps for 3 very long live streams, but I kind of all silence, timestamped everything so you can record every single thing. You want to install a package, you want to change the display manager, you want to change your setup, you want to change your XDG path. all of it is included right in here. You can see all of these different setups, how to custom compile things through everything. And NixOS, if you want to reference my personal configuration I used and kind of ended up with in here, you can do it here as well. But getting in NixOS and its reproducibility, everything's configured by that one configuration file. And I kind of put that at the very top here. Instead of configuring all these different programs with their own config file in etc, you're configuring everything really in etc nixos configuration.nix. There is another file that I recommend creating if your hardware is changing from distribution to distribution, keeping the and kind of go through all of these different things. I even go into gaming on NixOS. I wanted to put it all on bare metal and explore. So the big thing is just coming into etc NixOS configuration. So let's say you go through, let's just break down all these different lines. You put allow unfree because you might want to install Steam or a proprietary piece of software, and you're going to need that configuration line. As far as settings, this is just extra cache and stuff. I wanted to install, I think, Lutris and some other things, so I added a secondary repo here. Not really needed if you're not doing any gaming on Nix. And then importing any extra files. So let's say you want to kind of break apart some of the configuration.
I don't know what the fuck it's used for. Is it for high frequency trading or something? That's all I can imagine a hedge fund would ask him to do that for.
It'll also change and install that as well. With that done, and we can type Terminator, we now have it system wide. It's that fast. That's insane. So you're adding all your programs all in one go right over here. But it doesn't stop there. There's certain things where we can't really change the environment or change the things like we normally would. A big example of this is I'm using DWM, which is a custom compiled version I personally have patched and built. It's unlike any other DWM in existence. And I have my own specific patches. So what happens there? I can't build it and then put it in the system. I can't do like a sudo make install system wide. Then comes Nix overlays, where it will literally reference all my source code and build it every time I do that switch. So let's say I make some changes in my DWM. All I have to do is a sudo nixos rebuild. And if you look back in our rebuild that we just did, you can see it rebuilds it every single time. So it's kind of wild. So obviously don't put a big project in here to be built. Otherwise your rebuild times might be very long. But with DWM, it's so small that it's only a couple seconds. And then we add some like gaming tweaks here for a specific program. Say, hey, I want to make sure we enable this program and maybe open up some firewall rules for that specific program. All that's right here. We have virtualization in here, which we do these specific tags for virtualizing. You can see that in Virt Manager, where we could just pull up our local media and do an install of like say we want Windows. We could easily put that on here. And then we have Flatpak and other cool examples. And I even pimped out like the portal, so I have my specific theme. So when I pull up a Thunar, you can see it's not like that blinding white custom theme. It's using all of my LX appearance and stuff. So very, very cool way of doing it. And then anything else I want to do, like adjusting the system. So if I type in gparted, well, you can see it's trying to elevate to root. It knows, hey, that needs a little bit more than what you have. And it'll launch gparted. So this tweak right here is doing a policy kit that automatically elevates things. All this is extra that I've added, but I thought, hey, wow, what else can't you do? So I was trying to break it or find stuff I couldn't do in it, but there really was nothing. I can configure all the firewall, all the networking. If I want to do static IPs, I could put it here, or I could put it in a separate Nix config file, which we'll pull up here in a second. I have all my fonts here. So I love the Meslo LG Nerd font. It's kind of my default font for almost everything in my terminal. And I set all that up right here in just a little fonts. And then when we move back down to here, you got the system. It can auto update, or you could set this to not auto update. Now, NixOS, it does a release cycle about every 6 months to a year, just depending. And you can see the different system states, the channels it's going to grab. You can change all this configuration around. Now, looking at the hardware side of things, if we go over to NixOS again, you can see, hey, this is everything I'm doing. I have a bunch of different systems. We're attaching logical volume drives here, traditional like VFAT and EXT4 drives. We have NFS drives right here. So we can mount all my system files directly from my NAS box. So if I pull up Thunar, you can see the reference right here to grab directly from my Synology box back there. And all that's done independent. So if I want to take this configuration, but I don't want these drives, obviously, the UUIDs would be changed and there wouldn't be a logical volume here. I would want to remove these, or I could just take this and put it in my config.nix if I was like, hey, the network's not changing. I want to mount these drives on every system this gets deployed to. I just put it over to Nix config. And then all I do is install, kind of taking or home.
Okay, so it just reinstalls itself every time you update it? That's pretty cool. So it can just revert easily. because this is not even done. I don't know. I mean, I have a 3060 Ti and it's good. I don't know about...
Wow, NVIDIA. You know, in a way, I'm actually impressed. Your sheer lack of concern for any of your mainstream customers, it's kind of an achievement. Like you're in a race with Wizards of the Coast to see who can tick off their fan base the fastest, and you're out to prove you'll do anything to win.
I mean, NVIDIA's practically admitted they'd rather rely on software tricks than give us faster hardware. And the 40 series is not just overpriced, it's more like hate-priced.
And the thing is, guys, we know that getting outraged is not going to do anything. And you know it's not going to do anything. The 4060 Ti was panned by critics and the community alike, and still cost $400 somehow. But if you want us to get mad, then okay, let's get mad. Because the RTX 4060 is yet another nail in the world's most overpriced coffin. And we're tired of it. And we're also tired of not telling you about our sponsor.
Supermicro. The newest additions to Supermicro's H13 servers are here, powered by AMD's EPYC 9004 processor today.
Like its bigger titanium-ier brother, the 4060 is built on NVIDIA's AD106 GPU and has 8 gigs of GDDR6 memory.
So what are we losing when we downgrade to a feebler metal? Well, for starters, 29% of our CUDA cores, for the main cores, 33% fewer ray tracing and tensor cores, and for dessert, a sweet $100 price cut that makes it, am I reading this correctly? Less expensive than the last gen card it replaces. But it's not all roses. Those core counts aren't just lower than the 4060 Ti, they're lower than the last gen 3060. Also lower than last gen is the memory bus width, still at a piddly 128 bits. Oh, and don't forget they halved the number of PCIe lanes, which could cause a bottleneck for those still on PCIe Gen 3 platforms. But look, saith NVIDIA, the clock speeds are up, and there was a big bump to L2 cache to make up for the dire lack of memory bandwidth. Spoiler alert, it doesn't.
To prove it, we put the 4060 and its competition through a brutal series of tests. 1,100 total tests. That's right, the labs is in full swing, baby! We've included a bunch of cards that are still topping the Steam hardware charts, the best of AMD's bang for the buck lineup, and an Intel Arc A750 for good measure. And as you probably already figured out from the specs, this is not a 4K card, so let's get these results out of the way quick. The 4060 only touched 60 average FPS in F1 and was anywhere from meh to barely playable in our other titles. You could have a decent experience in older games or with settings dialed back to medium or low, but if you want to play on high, you'll have to resort to techniques some consider to be unnatural.
Sticking with pure rasterization performance for now though, let's talk 1080p. NVIDIA made it very clear with the 4060 Ti that they were not trying to make a card that is significantly more capable than its predecessor, and with the 4060, NVIDIA has extended their not trying streak.
In Cyberpunk 2077, the 4060 fails to outpace the 3060 Ti, which is like the one card you'd hope that this thing at least ties with, right? To add insult to injury, it even falls behind the now $30 to $50 cheaper RX 7600 from Team Red. Then we see the same story in F1 22, where the 4060 sits just 10% ahead of its last-gen direct counterpart, the 3060. The real star of the show then, again, is the last-gen 6700 XT, which cranks out 42% more frames than the 4060, and at the time of writing, can be purchased for just $10 more. In The Last of Us Part 1, the 4060 at least beats its direct Team Red competitor, RX 6700, but again fails to overcome the 3060 Ti. And the more tests we ran, the more true our observations became. This thing is so bad that if I didn't know any better, I'd say NVIDIA didn't even bother to benchmark to price this thing accordingly. To peek at Vulkan performance, we included Red Dead Redemption 2, where the story mostly stays the same, but the ARC A750 shows up with some impressive performance. Then in Forza, the 4060 finally ekes its way ahead of the 3060 Ti. Yay, I guess. And Returnal just confirms what we already know again. Overall, the 4060 offers very little in performance over its direct Team Red competitor, and it does so at a 20% premium in price. I hope the story changes when we look at 1440p.
Nope. We actually see the gap between the 3060 Ti and the 4060 increase in several games, and the gap between Team Red and NVIDIA gets no wider. And just like we saw in our review of the 4060 Ti, the 67XT is far and away the most sensible option for gamers looking for max bang for the buck, thanks in no small part to its 12 gigabytes of VRAM. To be clear, 8 gigabytes is fine for most things today, but that's unlikely to stay true forever.
Unlike the pricing on water bottles at LTTstore.com. They're the same price no matter what size you like.
I released the
$10 off
Skyrim mod packs that require 12 gigs or more.
Maybe there's a justification
They're
for
10.
all of this. A master plan. I mean, we're 5 years into NVIDIA's graphics reinvented, ray-traced future. Can a cheaper 60 series card give mainstream gamers a taste of that technology?
As it turns out, cutting so many RT cores negates any generational gain over the 3060 Ti, even if there is an improvement over the 3060. At least it still beats any of the AMD cards in its price bracket, but the frame rate hit from turning on ray tracing, even at 1080p, just might not be worth the bump in visual fidelity for many gamers. Of course, NVIDIA does also have DLSS and FrameGen.
And we do have to give credit where it's due here. When set to the quality preset, in most games, DLSS, NVIDIA's AI upscaling technique, is near indistinguishable from standard rendering. If you know where to look, you can find visual anomalies, but it's gotten good enough over the last few years that you pretty much need to be looking for them, and the performance gains are very substantial.
This is where NVIDIA wants to steer the discussion, and for good reason. Using DLSS at 1440p, we are seeing excellent gains in performance with the 4060 finally convincingly pulling ahead of last generation, thanks to one of DLSS's latest tricks, FrameGen. FrameGen smooths animations by creating new frames in between the natively rendered ones. Though it should be noted that frame generation comes with downsides like higher latency and also just not being magic. For example, with FrameGen, 4K gaming is possible on these cards, but we know from our tests that if you have less than 30 native FPS, it's really not the best playing experience. You can go see our experiments in the video linked in the description. With that said, in older games or at lower settings, I could see gamers using NVIDIA's machine learning AI tomfoolery to run this thing at 4K. The problem is it's limited to like a couple dozen games, so meh.
Moving on to productivity, a traditional strong point for NVIDIA, Blender sees the 4060 look fairly capable for a mainstream card. And the same goes for SpecView Perf, where it's clear that the 128-bit memory bus is a real problem. Though it's worth noting, this benchmark is getting a little long in the tooth. We are also working on getting some results from DaVinci Resolve, but at the time of review, driver issues stood in our way. Speaking of issues, what about the issue of expensive power? Whether gaming or running full-bore applications, like the rest of the 40 series, the 4060 sips power. F122 brings it all the way up to its rated power, but that's just 115 watts, a significant drop from its Ti-clad brother and even less than AMD's 7600. In fact, it's less than a 3050. If the price of power is a concern where you live, then the 4060 actually could offer a decent value. This is probably where the card shines its brightest. And thanks to sipping power, the thermals on these Asus dual cards we got for testing are also great, with temps never exceeding 73 degrees on the hotspot.
Which was kind of a lot of words to say, NVIDIA doesn't care about you when they can't book enough fab capacity to serve the far more lucrative AI customers that rocketed their valuation beyond $1 trillion earlier this month.
But we gave this wet fart of a GPU a full review treatment anyway, in hopes that sometime in the future, it'll come down in price and make sense to buy. That's just the best we can do, which we know is kind of lame. We
see what they think. Bracketed shit on it.
NVIDIA's $300 RTX 4060 releases tomorrow, with reviews going up today
but also kind of on Monday with some asterisk restrictions. And its most direct competitor, at least recent one, is the AMD RX 7600, which itself is $300. Actually, it's $270. They changed it before launch. Actually, it's $250 now because in the week since launch, it has dropped precipitously. So, $250 7600 is the closest competition. And AMD, of course, making it as hard as possible for us to retain any sort of accuracy while discussing GPU price in a review. Now, this card is following up the 4060 Ti, which was a massive waste of hardware given its positioning. NVIDIA's $300 RTX 4060 releases tomorrow, with reviews going up today, but also kind of on Monday with some that has now been as low as like 380 with sales recently. So basically, what we're being told by the GPU manufacturers is people not buying stuff makes price go down. Learn more in my Economics 101 class. The 4060 is the cheapest NVIDIA card introduced in some years. So today we're reviewing it and benchmarking it against the 4060 Ti, the 7600, the A750, and we'll also have several older GPUs. Those include the RTX 3060, the 2060, and the 1060 in our charts. Let's get started with this one. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. We use Squarespace for our own GN store and juggle complex, multi-piece orders all the time with it. Squarespace makes it fast for us to roll out new products with detailed pages full of galleries, videos, and descriptors. It's also useful for your own resume sites, for photographer or project portfolios, or for starting your new small business idea. There's never been a better time to try and start your new business than right now. And we can vouch that Squarespace makes it easy. Visit squarespace.com/gamersnexus to get 10% off your first purchase with Squarespace. So the very basics, the RTX 4060, it's a partner-only launch. There are no Founders Edition cards. That means we're working with a partner model, and the one that NVIDIA chose to send out to reviewers was the Asus Dual model. It has an overclocking percent increase option of up to 20%. We tested it stock as always, but we have power numbers for it with the OC applied. Now, the biggest limitation here is that memory bus, which is the same for all cards. It doesn't matter which partner it is, it's a GPU thing. So the memory bus is 128 bits wide. It's the same as the 4060 Ti's memory bus. That is down from a 192-bit bus on the 3060 series cards. However, the cache has increased significantly with the 40 series, and that's been NVIDIA's #1 defense since they announced these things like a couple months ago. And we've talked about that, and then we proved in the 4060 Ti review that it simply is not as beneficial as NVIDIA wishes it could be, because increasing the cache would be far cheaper than doubling or even just increasing by 33% the VRAM on the cards that they're shipping. So that limitation, well, and also the bus width challenge. So it's the limitations here where NVIDIA is trying to shrink the die size, which means axing the bus width and either reallocating that die area to something else or just cutting it entirely to drive costs down, while also reducing the physical memory modules and the cost of memory on the GPU. That's what's putting NVIDIA in this position where they're trying to drive up margins, they're trying to drive down cost to do that, and you end up with cards that are just not scaling that well as you get past 1080p. So we're stuck in this weird time vortex of 2016 looking at 1080p for a best case scenario for modern sort of quote unquote low end GPUs. That was like not serious, by the way. Before someone's like, low end reviewers, $400, not low end. Now the best thing that the 4060 has going for it in terms of that memory spec is the reduction of its power overall, not like consumed power, but performance. And that's because the limitations of the memory may become less binding if instead we are hitting limitations of, say, FP32 units instead, rather than with the 4060 Ti, where you're definitely becoming bandwidth bound. The RTX 3060, confusingly, was a 12 gigabyte card back when it launched, so the 8 gigabytes here on the 4060 is a reduction in frame buffer size. The 3060 also had the 192-bit bus width, but a smaller cache. PCIe further is limited, so it's actually on a by 8 interface. And the most positive thing is the MSRP. The 3060 launched for $330. With the 4060 launching at $300, that's at least down. And that would be great. The performance will also be higher, so that's a move in the right direction. Unfortunately, though, the scale has moved so far for the GPU stack to where the 4060's comparative performance, meaning its relative scaling against its neighbors and predecessors as compared to prior years' 60 series cards is perhaps more similar to what we would expect of a 4050 if using prior GPU performance scaling and naming schemes. As long as the value is there, whatever. At some point, it is, in fact, just a name. But as we've discussed before, the real problem is what does the name convey? And in a scenario where the community has a set expectation for what a 60 series class card is and what it does and what it's worth, it's not really reasonable to expect you can just, move all the names to the right a little bit, increase the price, and not have people minimally confused and maximally feel ripped off, which they do, at least for the last several launches now. Now, before we really get into it, we also have to be wary of NVIDIA's approach to marketing this product. So NVIDIA allowed for reviewers to post early pre-embargo, basically impressions, so one benchmark of the 4060. That's abnormal. This is typically everything has to be held until the embargo lifts, so everyone publishes the review at the same time. There have been a few exceptions to this over the years, but this particular one is very restrictive, and the past exceptions that, top of my head, I can remember weren't quite as constrained as this one. So here's how it worked. NVIDIA basically reached out to a handful of media outlets. We were included in that, and they asked, do you want to run early tests? Here are the parameters. We obviously declined, or you would have seen a video from us, and my understanding is that Steve from Hardware Unboxed also declined for similar reasons. So the reasons we had, at least at GN, were that it's only Cyberpunk, it's only with this particular game settings, and we didn't get any further into details than that because I instantly was like, no. And to be fair, our rep expected that answer. And there's not even sort of the cover fire of this isn't a new game, it's not a new feature. It's just
I mean, I have 3060 Ti, but I probably will be switching over
of being for any reason other than
AMD.
You know, I don't have the biggest problem with other creators taking that. It all comes into the
maybe
approach.
when like new cards come out,
get the
cheap ones.
How it worked, and it's very clear. Then whatever, fine. The more concerning part is just what is this telegraph from NVIDIA, which is we are concerned about the reception of this product. That's what it telegraphs. Anyway, we said no, and this is our full review. So we're going to keep the charts really objective, run through them, and we'll talk about it at the end. We'll start with the thermals and the fan curve because it's actually really interesting for this card. These are specific more to the video card from ASUS than from the GPU on NVIDIA's side. For this test, we ran a ray-traced workload until a steady state and allowed it to hold for 30 minutes. This was in a fixed ambient temperature of 21 degrees Celsius. The GPU temperature spiked hard and then fell down to about 58 degrees Celsius over time.
What the fuck?
Hotspot temperature ramped immediately to 80 degrees, fell to 60,
and
then ramped back to 70. This is extremely abnormal behavior, and it's indicative of a terrible fan curve design or very bad contact with an overcompensating fan. We can determine which of those two it is by plotting the fan curve against the right axis. We can see that it was too late to start. It kicked in just after the load got bad, and then it overcompensated immediately as a result, and then it gradually backed off. So the contact is fine. It was just a late start or bad hysteresis because the workload remained constant during this time. The fan then started ramping again in the middle before falling off, and that's not ambient fluctuation. ASUS's hysteresis here is improperly timed and is designed in such a way that the user will be made hyper-aware of any ramps and deramps because it responds that much. ASUS has done poorly in building its vBIOS, and this is something that can be corrected with basically a BIOS update for your video card. Whether or not they shipped the retail ones like this, we don't know, but at least the review sample came this way. Now on to the games. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the more intensive games in our test suite. So at 1080p, the RTX 4060 ran at 86 FPS average, which allows the RTX 7600 to lead at about 4%. That's not a great start for the 4060. The 4060 Ti is 23% of the 4060 here, demonstrating why NVIDIA positioned this card the way they did. There had to be a reason to spend $100 more. Any less than 20%, it's even worse than it already is for the 4060 Ti. In the previous generation, the 3060 Ti was about 26% ahead of the 3060, so at least this much tracks. The A770 and A750 are both dangerously close to the RTX 4060, with the A750 having been as low as $200 recently. It still has hit and miss drivers, but it's improved so drastically that it's become a relevant competitor. 1440p is somewhat playable on this class of card, especially if you drop the settings a bit. The RTX 4060 held 1440p at 52 FPS average, with 1% and 0.1% lows timed proportionally to the cards flanking it. The 7600's 56 FPS average isn't a noticeable improvement, but it's still better. The A750 also outperformed the RTX 4060, with the 6600 XT getting dangerously close. The 3060 Ti leaps way ahead at 62 FPS average, and it's just behind the 4060 Ti. As we talked about in the 4060 Ti review, these lower-end 40 series cards sometimes struggle as resolution increases, but we've noticed, and you'll see this throughout the review, that the 4060 at least seems to be in a better position relatively than the 4060 Ti was. Let's test the continuance of that scaling behavior. In the same game at 4K, even though you wouldn't necessarily expect playability here, we can study the performance to understand the card's ranking. The 4060 falls significantly behind, regressing as compared to the RTX 3060. NVIDIA is struggling to compete with itself here as resolution boosts in this game, with even the RTX 2060 getting embarrassingly close to the 4060. This is disappointing to see. Even if the card is more likely used for 1080 or 1440p, it's just not what you want from something that's many years newer than a 2060. Once again, though, it's clear why NVIDIA wants everyone using DLSS. It makes the new stuff look a lot better than it actually is. In Final Fantasy XIV at 1080p, the RTX 4060 at 189 FPS average leads the RX 7600 by 2.5%. It's not a lot, but for NVIDIA's sake, it's at least one back in the direction that benefits it. The 0.1% lows are also significantly bolstered on the 4060 as compared to the RX 7600 and the RX 6600 XT. We'll look at frame time charts individually at the end of this review. The 4060 Ti leads the 4060 by 13%. Compared to previous generations, though, the 4060 is ahead of the 3060 by 19%, the RTX 2060 by 30%, and the GTX 1060 6GB by 97%. Intel's ARC cards aren't as competitive here as they were previously, but they're still hanging in there. The A750's 170 FPS average achieves 89% of the performance for 83% of the price when at $250, or for 73% of the price if it's on sale for $230, which just was recently. 1440p allows us to add some other cards back to the chart, as load ramps enough to decrease the CPU bind. The 4060 falls just behind the A770 here, and its 119 FPS average has it between that and the A750. Lows are similar between these three cards, and the RX 7600 is beaten by 8%. So NVIDIA has climbed here relative to our first game we were testing. Generationally, the 4060 still holds a 22% lead over the 3060, similar to the 1080p spacing, although the 3060 Ti outmatches the 4060. At 4K, the RTX 4060 held 53 FPS average and sat again between the Intel ARC cards. Its lead over the competing RX 7600 has expanded to 15%, finally establishing a meaningful gap between the two of them. Generationally, the 4060 holds a 19% lead against the 3060, so it's at least not struggling as much as the 4060 Ti was against the 3060 Ti, where we often saw equivalence, or in the worst cases, the 3060 Ti outperforming the 4060 Ti. As for the Ti, its lead is about 20% over the 4060, with the 3060 Ti in the position we showed in our 4060 Ti review. An embarrassing lead. Now for F1 at 1080p. The RTX 4060's 145 FPS average has it functionally tied with the RX 7600 in averages. However, the 4060 maintains far better 1% and 0.1% lows in this particular game. It'd be the actual victor here, given just those two. The RX 6700 XT is actually a compelling alternative. As long as those $310 to $330 options last, it holds a 33% lead over the 4060, for likely the same price as most other partner models. That one would make the most sense at the price in this scenario. The Intel ARC cards struggle with this particular game, and they have since launch. They're both towards the bottom of the chart at 1080p, illustrating why we still can't give the A750 a sweeping recommendation. It's still more of an enthusiast's card. At 1440p, the RTX 4060 held 106 FPS average, reducing its lead over the 3060 to 16%. The Ti's 26% lead pushes it to 133 FPS average, but the 6700 XT maintains a lead even ahead of that, and it's still available in this price class. As for AMD's RX 7600, it's again technically tied to the 4060, but it's behind in lows, and ARC remains behind as well. Finally, at 4K, the 4060's lead over the 3060 shrinks to 12%. It's still ahead at least, but the behavior between the 3060 Ti and 4060 Ti has carried down the stack. They're just far enough apart this time where it's not as bad. The A770 technically pulls ahead, but given its struggles comparatively in this title, we wouldn't recommend it over the 4060. Total Warhammer is another highly intensive game in our suite. At 1080p, the RTX 4060 landed at 105 FPS average, ahead of the A770 in average FPS, but also more significantly ahead in lows. The 3060 Ti outdoes the 4060 here, as does the 6700 XT, although neither by as impressive a margin as we've seen previously. Critically, the 7600 is within range of the average FPS of the 4060 again, but remains behind in lows, and we'll look at frame time charts at the end, because they're kind of interesting. At 1440p, the 4060 remains sandwiched between the ARC cards, still with advantaged lows though, while the 7600 trails in all metrics here. The uplift over the 3060 is 16%, so still a better generational gain than basically 0% that we saw in the 4060 Ti and 3060 Ti. But this game is challenging to run at 4K, so let's move on to the next game. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is next. In this one, the RTX 4060 ran at 158 FPS average, separated from the 4060 Ti by a 30 FPS gap, or 18%. The 6700 XT is ahead of the 4060 by 14%, keeping it on the short list of desirable cards for value right now. Against the new 7600, the 4060 holds a 5% lead, which isn't a big enough gap to really care about, especially if there's a price difference, and the lows are close enough to be basically noise between the results. Intel's Arc A750 is unfortunately challenged in this one. It's facing the same immature driver issue that Intel has had in some of the other games. The A750's 109 FPS average allows a massive 50 FPS gap, or about 45% between it and the 4060. Although Intel has clearly become fiercely competitive in some titles, it still has less predictable behavior overall. In Tomb Raider at 1440p, the 4060 ran at 103 FPS average and was about tied with the 7600. Given the new $250 pricing of the 7600, sometimes anyway, it depends on which one you look at, that's really just not good positioning overall for the 4060. NVIDIA doesn't even have a lows advantage in this particular title. For the Ti cards, the 4060 Ti has a 22% lead, so that appears to be about the average between these games. The 3060 Ti is dangerously close to the 4060 here, and encroaching on the 4060 Ti, but we already know that story. The 6700 XT deserves yet another mention. Although certainly not long for this world, it's carrying a 22% lead over the 4060 at about the same price at the time of writing. We don't know how long that stock will last, but they must have enough for now. Out of curiosity, we'll quickly look at 4K as well. This is mostly important to understand if the 4060 and 3060 behave as the 3060 Ti and 4060 Ti did. That answer is no, but the behavior still matches. The 4060 was 21% of the 3060 in the 1440p test. It was at 28% ahead in the 1080p test. But it's only 13% ahead in the 4K test, so that is diminishing significantly with each resolution increase. Fortunately, it's not diminishing at a pace where it becomes realistically relevant or limiting, which is contrary to what we saw in the 4060 Ti versus 3060 Ti comparison. And that's on display right here once again, but it still shows the architectural shift favoring 1080p. As someone who's been reviewing cards long enough now to remember 1080p with high settings being a big deal on $200 cards, it hasn't gotten any less weird that we're still there today. The software landscape has changed, games have changed, but it seems like we're still targeting 1080p. Horizon Zero Dawn was one of the worst case scenarios for the 4060 Ti versus 3060 Ti comparison, so it's back. This game was particularly challenging for the 4060 Ti because of the bus width and frame buffer limitations. The 4060 ran at 143 FPS average at 1080p, which has it about tied with the RX 7600. AMD also benefits here because its lows are technically higher. The Intel cards remain toward the bottom of this chart, so they're out of the consideration for this one. And generationally, NVIDIA posts about a 15% gain over the 3060 here, 41% over the 2060, and about 133% over the 1060. At 1440p, the 4060 Ti led the 4060 by 16%, with the 3060 Ti about the same in rank. The 7600 is functionally tied with the 4060 again in all metrics, and the 6700 XT retains an 18% lead over the 4060. Compared to the 3060, the 4060's lead is only 12% this time. That's slimmed down from some of the other tests. Just to study architecture again, at 4K, the 4060 leads the 3060 by only 11% here, so the gap is dropping. The 4060 also is at risk of struggling with textures as playtime extends in some of these titles that are VRAM heavy. Even the A750 is about caught up with the 4060 now. Power consumption is up now. NVIDIA originally leaned on power consumption as its main marketing point for the RTX 4060, specifically mentioning how much money can be saved over a 4-year period, which is a long enough time scale that we know NVIDIA definitely doesn't want you to own that card that long anyway. But it's a reach for something positive is the point. We always test power anyways, we're going to look at that. And the RTX 4060 pulls about 120 watts under a full load. So in the sense of power consumption, they're right. It is generally efficient, particularly against the previous generation. The Asus dual card offers an additional 20% power offset, and that should increase it to about 144 watts by math, but given the Furmark power virus behavior, it ends up at 164 watts with an OC.
Look.
The 120 watt number is the most relevant though. That's stock. That's less than the RTX 3050 previously, and it's about 40 watts under the RX 7600. So again, it's true that NVIDIA is more efficient, but the multi-year savings argument is just really weak. First of all, you of course have to look at the delta between the power consumed, and you have to assume a pretty high amount of hours of full power consumption per day. It would be erroneous to look at only the absolute power. It's that difference that matters. But this becomes more relevant in areas where power is more expensive too. So the argument, even just in general, might not stand well where you live. For a lot of you in Europe, we know it's very expensive for power. For us, it's 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So it just depends on where you live. Secondly, the low-end market isn't really the place to make that argument. It matters more at the high end, and NVIDIA is a shameless consumer of a lot of power there. The power figure and efficiency are both good on the 4060. It's just not what we think people should use to determine whether they're buying a card for gaming, unless they're running it nearly constantly. With power out of the way, let's briefly look at ray tracing. In Cyberpunk, we test ray tracing while also enabling like-for-like SR technologies. For AMD, that's FSR. For NVIDIA, it's DLSS 2. These are configured for equal horizontal and vertical scaling. The RTX 4060 ran at 81 FPS average at 1080p with RT on and using DLSS. That has it at 18% ahead of the 3060. So the scaling is similar to what we saw in rasterized scenarios. The 4060 now leads the RX 6700 XT, establishing an advantage in RT in this title, and it has a significant lead over the Intel cards on FSR. The RX 7600 is also left far behind.
I think it's because I'm installing something that's using all my RAM.
Lead for the 4060. It just doesn't have the horsepower to push both RT, higher graphics settings, and then still maintain the frame rate with both of those. We won't bother showing 1440p. It cut the performance more than in half, so it's not playable. Tomb Raider's next. The 4060's 94 FPS average has it ahead of the 7600 by 21%. That's half the lead that it had in the more RT-heavy Cyberpunk title, out. But still enough of a lead to demonstrate that the 4060's primary advantage over the 7600
turning down the quality
and efficiency is ray tracing performance. The 6700 XT is
already as low as it could be,
dragging its lead down.
Well, not yeah.
Now in F1 with ray tracing,
okay, now it's fine.
Ran at 63 FPS average and was about tied with the 6700 XT. If you've been listening to our 6700 XT recommendations during the first half of the review, evaluate your RT usage when making your final decision, because this is the area the card is the strongest. More RT might swing you back towards NVIDIA, one way or the other. Now we're moving to frame time charts. This is a blank template for the next chart. Frame times represent the frame-to-frame latency measured in on-present on the left axis. That time is in milliseconds, so it's how long each frame takes to present to the screen and render. Lower is better, but more consistent is best, and spikes greater than 8 to 12 milliseconds, especially if they are repeated and frequent, become noticeable. An ideal consistency, technically, would be a nearly flat line, but that's kind of just VSync, except without cutting off the frame ceiling. Realistically, it doesn't work that way though, because you need room to scale up and down as the workload increases or decreases. Here's the first plot. Total War has the RTX 4060 maintaining frame times around 8 milliseconds, and it slows to 10 milliseconds as we get into a more difficult part of the benchmark, and then continues to scale. Overall, its behavior is consistent. The largest excursions are to 22 milliseconds and 20 milliseconds, but 2 frames out of the first 1800 or so really isn't that bad. There's a couple more in there, but this is overall pretty good behavior. The RX 7600 is next. This one has far more excursions. It's not bad overall. None of these are catastrophic, but it explains why we saw the lower frame time consistency in our earlier average bar chart. Those 1% and 0.1% bars help point us toward the need for specific frame time plots. The 7600 blows out the 0.1% average with the spikes that we're seeing to 40 milliseconds and 35 milliseconds. It's just generally less consistent, and there are enough of these to be occasionally visible as stutters. The 4060 is more consistent here. The next chart is for Horizon Zero Dawn at 1080p. In this one, the RTX 4060 plotted between 6 to 8 milliseconds, typically about 7 milliseconds, with overall consistent frame-to-frame intervals. The RX 7600 had more visibly noticeable spikes on a line graph, but despite this, the 7600 was overall lower in its average frame times, and in that sense, it was more consistent too. The end of the chart most clearly illustrates the 4060's slightly wider top to bottom range. Finally, here's a frame time chart for Cyberpunk 2077. In this one, the RTX 4060 was consistent overall. The game is more variable in load, so we see this up and down pattern. That's not indicative of bad frame time pacing here though, because each frame, sort of n-1 frames or n+1 frames, are relatively consistent. It's just that the RX 7600 was better. So as you saw in the average chart, the two were close. It's just AMD held the lead for this test, and that's reflected here. So the review is pretty simple. This isn't as egregiously embarrassing and bad as the 4060 Ti was, because the 4060 Ti was surpassed, as a reminder, by the 3060 Ti in like 4K gaming. That's bad. It's really terrible to be beaten by the prior generation product that you are supposed to be replacing. It's difficult as a reviewer as you get deeper and deeper into sort of a generation or review cycle to look at the pricing, because you kind of have to avoid being gaslit by the companies into this is a new normal. Let's look at this objectively. First of all, the 7600 and the 4060 Ti have both dropped in price lately. Not every 4060 Ti has dropped, but it's starting. Those dominoes will continue to fall. The companies overbought, expecting the crypto and pandemic boom to last for eternity, and that expectation has led them to overstuffing the market with supply that is actually still clearing even for the 30 series and the 6000 series. Of course, the longer people delay purchasing, the lower those prices will fall. Remember, if you bought a card in 2020 or later, you can probably skip this entire generation. The 30 series was pretty good. The 6000 series also pretty good, at least for hard numbers. So if you bought one of those, it's good to stay informed, but it's pretty normal in any time of this market, any year, to skip at least one generation. Plus, it just reduces waste if you're happy with what you have. Now, if you just want a fun project for a weekend, go for it. But waiting will probably continue to yield drops. Now, that said, if you're buying this card, here's what we think about each alternative. In rasterization, the RX 6700 XT is still competitive. It's not always as consistent in frame times, but it's often ahead in FPS enough that it doesn't really matter. It's just a better alternative. That lead, however, diminishes as we enter ray tracing scenarios, but if you're able to get one close to $300, and especially if you mostly play rasterized games, it is strongly worth considering as a top choice. If we were willing to recommend it as an alternative to the 4060 Ti at a similar price, then of course it follows it would make sense as an alternative to the 4060. And the pricing, at least at the time we wrote this script, I just checked and I saw 3 cards on Newegg that were in stock for $310 after a promo code you have to apply and checkout, and then there are some others in the $330 range, so that's pretty good. Next one, in rasterization, the RX 7600 is often close to the 4060. Not always, but now that there are $50 price drops sometimes on some of these models, which is a 17% reduction, it is close enough to be meaningful at this point.
Oh, it's me.
welcome back to another Hardware News Recap for the week. In this one, we'll be talking about some confusion about the continued existence of Intel's Arc A770. The short version is that there was a story ran earlier this week that indicated Intel would be discontinuing the A770 kind of vaguely or generally. The actual fact is that they're only discontinuing the Intel branded card, but the A770 is still being made. I just want to get that one up front and center. That is a massive misunderstanding. It's very different from the reality. So we're going to be talking about that. We'll also be going over AMD FSR versus DLSS inclusion in games. There's another story that popped up this past week. We have some thoughts on that one. The 4060 Ti already being sold for less than MSRP. Also, the 4060 has some performance numbers from NVIDIA. And finally, well, in addition to other topics, we'll be talking about the replaceable batteries ruling that the EU is bringing down upon the industry. That's a good thing. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Lexar Aries RGB DDR5 memory. Lexar's high-end Aries line supports both XMP and Expo profiles, making it easy to deploy on Intel and AMD platforms alike. That makes it simple to transplant the memory from one system to another and still retain a tuned profile on stick. Lexar's Aries line ships in varying frequencies, but the kit we have is DDR5 6000 and it's overclockable. Learn more at the link in the description below. Really quick note before we dive into the first topic, we published a bunch of videos on GN Extras recently. Some of those are like unsung heroes types of things. So we have one with EVGA's BIOS engineers. They're about to depart and go to new companies, but we wanted to tell their story and talk about what they contributed, talked about BIOS engineering, really cool topics. So that's over on GN Extras, along with some other videos that we've been trying to build that channel up again now. So you should go check that out. We'll link it below if you're curious about it. And just while we're doing the quick updates, another reminder that we are intentionally slowing down our publication for the next couple weeks. We're doing a bunch of cool things internally to work on processes, improving our testing, all this stuff. Talked about it a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to say it all again. But we're still following that plan. So we've got a couple videos scattered here and there. We're going to keep doing news, but you'll see a intentionally lower production, and it gives us all time to kind of just make cool stuff and then use that for the rest of the year. So that's kind of what we're working on now, and that's where the GN Extras videos come in to give you something to watch in the meantime. Okay, first story. For the first topic, so confusion about A770's continued existence. It's pretty quick. Basically, A770 will remain in production through Intel's partners. That would be like Sparkle, for example. I think Asus has made some of the A380, stuff like that. But the confusion came about because Intel issued one of its usual product change notifications, or PCNs, where it stated that its first-party 16GB version of the A770 would no longer be manufactured. So that is specifically the Intel-designed card, the one they call limited edition. Well, everything's limited eventually from Intel. Up next, WCCF Tech recently published an article that drew attention to what they described as a trend of games that would be AMD-sponsored games with FSR upscaling not also featuring NVIDIA's DLSS. And the implication here, as ever with NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel, is that AMD is basically paying for an exclusivity right within those games and vendor locking the games to block DLSS or inclusion of NVIDIA's technologies. In other words, to keep competing upscaling technologies like DLSS and XeSS out of games that FSR is in. That was the implication. That's how the story was sort of drafted. The article has since created some buzz on Reddit, or what's left of it after its apocalypse, so we wanted to check things out for ourselves. AMD keeps a list of its featured games on this page, and we cross-checked them for upscaling support using this list on PC Gaming Wiki. While it's not a clean sweep for FSR dominance, most of the recent larger titles on AMD's list do neglect DLSS and XeSS. Most recently, this applies to Star Wars Jedi Survivor and the Resident Evil 4 remake. All told, 14 of AMD's featured games out of the 29 shown are FSR only. We don't think that's enough to be a smoking gun, especially when you consider that some of them are console ports where AMD's tech is the only tech that's present. Adding DLSS or XeSS would represent additional work, even if relatively minimal, which it should be from what we understand. And a Reddit user, often sarcastic, that's the name, that's not a comment on Reddit, although that would also be accurate, took another approach and added up totals for all of the games on the list, not just AMD sponsored. It's an interesting tally. This tally shows that there are actually more DLSS exclusive games than FSR. It's not entirely apples to apples though, because NVIDIA has a larger market share, it put out DLSS earlier, and it put in some work to make DLSS easy to integrate into major engines. When WCCF Tech reached out for comment, AMD said this, quote, AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution is an open source technology that supports a variety of GPU architectures, including consoles and competitive solutions. And we believe an open approach that is broadly supported on multiple hardware platforms is the best approach that benefits developers and games. Side note, that is an incredibly long sentence, AMD. AMD continued and said, AMD is committed to doing what is best for game developers and gamers, and we give developers the flexibility to implement FSR into whichever games they choose. Now, that's a pretty indirect response. It basically says, here's a bunch of reasons FSR is good without directly answering the question of, is there an exclusivity agreement? And AMD is kind of highlighting that FSR doesn't require tensor cores to operate. So in other words, they answered a different question. The next one was a quote that WCCF Tech received from NVIDIA, and we'll provide our thoughts on this as we continue going. Quote, NVIDIA does not and will not block, restrict, discourage, or hinder developers from implementing competitor technologies in any way. We provide the support and tools for all game developers to easily integrate DLSS if they choose, and even created NVIDIA Streamline to make it easier for game developers to add competitive technologies to their games. Now, first of all, to review both of these quotes, AMD has a clear and decisive victory for sentence length. I almost passed out when reading one of AMD's sentences, so maybe we can create a conspiracy theory about how they tried to kill me. While NVIDIA's, I didn't almost pass out even once. I did, however, have to take a large breath in the middle, and we'll cut around it. But AMD still won this exchange, the sentence length. One thing that adds some fuel to the conspiracy theory is that AMD opted not to participate in NVIDIA's open source Streamline. Streamline is software that aims to give developers a one-stop shop for adding all the major upscaling technologies at once. AMD claims that it didn't want to collaborate on Streamline due to it, quote, not providing benefit, end quote, for gamers and for facilitating the use of the closed source DLSS. Now, when you add that mentality to the sort of emergent trend of FSR only titles that are recent, we could see how it would be not much of a jump to think that AMD is trying to lock those down as exclusives or avoid competing directly. And realistically, regardless of what the facts are at this point, AMD's answer just really isn't that good. There's a lot of better ways they could have handled this, like directly answering the question, but that's the story so far. I'm back in a new shirt. The news was getting wrapped up, and then we put everything on pause because of this bad timing from AMD. We had to add this section in. So in the last section, we talked about how our conclusion was basically, let's wait and see and give it a little more time to see if AMD truly is forcing any developer's hand in exclusivity. That was before the Starfield announcement. We were about to upload news. The Starfield announcement came out, and we were like, yep, that's the smoking gun part that we were missing. Let's add this back in so we can represent the full picture. So, here's the news. Bethesda has gladly provided the additional evidence we were waiting for. AMD and Bethesda have announced that AMD is Starfield's exclusive partner. This was posted on AMD's YouTube channel. There's not much news other than AMD posting the video with its own staff and featuring Todd Howard of Bethesda, but the timing is again unfortunate. We reached out to AMD and asked this question. We said, does the contract between AMD and Bethesda have any language which intentionally blocks or could be construed as blocking or limiting Bethesda's ability to integrate alternative upscaling technologies within Starfield, of course, referring to DLSS, XESS, and FSR. To AMD's credit, it did answer us. The answer was, we have no comment at this time. Now, AMD sure had a comment last time, and we saw how that meandered around the question and proceeded to do nothing. So this one at least is more direct, and it does answer the question. They didn't say yes, but they kind of meant yes. This one is kind of like Schrodinger's marketing dilemma box, because at this point, this game is going to launch, and if it has DLSS or XESS, AMD's going to point to it and be like, look, everyone overreacted. See, we are allowing the competition. What I think is actually going to happen behind the scenes is if there is any inclusion, because of this statement, we have no comment, it will be because AMD saw this nightmare happening in real time and maybe even actively encouraged Bethesda to add at least one other technology, because it's going to try and pull a 4D chess move and do its master debate once again. It's something they said debated once about a price. It's an old reference, but look it up. Just be careful what you type in. So they're going to get their master debater on this marketing, and they'll be able to say, I told you so. It was fair all along. We told you we're being open. Wherein the reality may more likely be that, and because it's unprovable, AMD has the cover fire here, the reality may more likely be that they were in fact restricting it and then backpedaled it because of what's happening right now, if you've looked at the response to all of this. So anyway, we look forward to giving AMD the 4D chess manipulation of the year award if they can pull it off. But otherwise, right now, the language and the lack of comment to a very direct question tells us that this may be an FSR only thing. But modders will probably just add the others in anyway. Next up, the 4060 Ti. It's only been a month since the 4060 Ti launched, but it's already getting discounted.
The demand for every single generation increased and increased and increased.
The MSI Ventus 2X Black is available brand new for $380 on Newegg now, or at least at the time of writing, which is $20 under the untenable $400 MSRP. Even at $380 though, it's still not a good price. And while this is the first time it's seen a price drop in the US, a Palit 4060 Ti got cut immediately following launch at German retailer Mind Factory. Signs point to low demand for the card across the board, as places like Newegg have had no trouble maintaining stock levels on almost all SKUs. Most of these are probably going to gather dust until either NVIDIA institutes rebates or retailers take it upon themselves to slash margins just to move units. For reference, if you're curious, the average margin for a video card, as in what the board partner makes, is less than 10%. So at least for NVIDIA GPUs. We've heard the range as low as 1.7% and as high as about 11%. So they're all within that range. There's not a ton of margin in this particular industry because so much of it goes to NVIDIA, and there's a lot of competition between the board partners, but not really between GPU makers. And additionally, NVIDIA does push for keeping the cards as close to MSRP as possible, which means there's kind of limitations to how much the board partners can be creative to try and extract some extra margin without just making the product garbage. So you make it better, you make it worse. Those are the two ways to get your margin. So it's a tight industry already. Now, this is all a backdrop to how bad the value on the 4060 Ti is. In our review, it was often within single-digit percentages of the 3060 Ti, which is just embarrassing considering you can buy those for $340 to $350, or as low as $250 if you're willing to go open box. And the 3060 Ti outclassed the 4060 Ti in many scenarios we tested, like 4K gaming. You can see it in our charts.
And now I realize it's too much.
Next story is mostly positive here, so that's nice. In a landslide vote of 587 to 9, the EU Parliament just voted that batteries are to become more user serviceable. This is great for people who like to repair their own devices and keep them in service longer. Reduces your cost of ownership, it significantly reduces waste in the world, and this regulation in particular is also supposed to help with reducing waste of lithium for lithium-ion batteries. Now, this is great news for sustainability, especially because batteries will continue to see increased demand for EVs, which will make them even more expensive. And the benefit is not just environmental, but consumer-facing. Brings us back to the 2009 to 2012 era of keep your phone alive forever and just swap the battery that's under the backplate. The regulation's hard targets include a 73% collection rate for waste portable batteries by 2030, recovery of 80% of lithium by 2031, and the prescription of certain percentages of recycled materials being made into new batteries 8 years after the adoption of the regulation. The headline change revolves around, quote, designing portable batteries and appliances in such a way that consumers can themselves easily remove and replace them. The wording used here is broad and sweeping, which is good. It seemingly indicates any portable battery-powered device, but the most common items under that description are phones. It's been nearly a full decade since removable batteries were commonplace on phones, so it's going to take considerable work for the industry with all of its inertia to pivot back to those forgotten roots. And by forgotten, we mean that they saw large amounts of money, killed the roots, and buried them as deep as possible after lighting them aflame and turning them to ash. But we're going to go back and dig them up and what do you put them in? Do you make like a root smoothie? We're going to make them roots so that it's good again. I don't know. This has gone off the rails. The upside is that you don't need to replace the phone or carry out a major repair when you just need a battery swap. That's pretty obvious. The downside is that phone manufacturers want you to believe, at least, that it's things like durability and water resistance that could theoretically go down. Now, there are solutions to these problems, though. They can engineer their way out, even if it means headphone jacks, the only true way to connect headphones, make a return. And yes, I will die clutching my 3.5 millimeter plug for my headphones before I switch to something like AirPods. That's my recent old man shouts at Apple AirPod-shaped cloud rant, and you can subscribe to my newsletter for more in the future. Other changes include a carbon footprint declaration and label for EV and e-bike batteries, as well as a digital battery passport. The passport would be a way to track many different stats regarding a battery's provenance and life cycle. Now, overall, this looks like a good thing, because currently we're trapped in the cycle of mining, using, and discarding devices that use lithium-ion batteries. And although there are ways there's a small company that most of you probably haven't heard of, but it's best known for marooning its users on an OS every other generation, ensuring that with each new subsequent OS launch, at least half of the existing user base is left behind forever, using the more sensible means to navigate the OS. And in an effort to keep its reputation in this way, Microsoft has now announced that it's actively making Windows 11 even worse. It's great news, because we actually didn't think that was possible. But it is. In a world where we already have to click 3 times just to edit a batch file, because edit is an advanced, dangerous command that must be buried beneath submenus and submenus, Microsoft is now hiding even more options that date back to the XP era and even before in some instances. In the company's most recent groan-inducing statement that sets difficulty mode to hardcore for IT managers everywhere, Microsoft has listed that it is removing the following features from its folder options menu in Explorer. The options are hide folder merge conflict, always show icons, never thumbnails, display file icon on thumbnails, display file type information on folder tips, hide protected OS files, that one is actually an important one, show drive letters, also important, show pop-up description for folder and desktop items, show encrypted or compressed NTFS files in color, and use sharing wizard. Now, not all of these are day-to-day important, but it does sort of fall into the same category as everything else Microsoft changes, which is, why are we changing this again? They're already kind of in an advanced menu. Who is it harming to leave there? But don't worry. Microsoft says you'll still be able to access these things via the extremely user-friendly way of registry keys. The good news is that this will be just as user-friendly as trying to get your folder names to show up in the icons in the taskbar so that you don't have this increasingly when you're trying to see what folder is which. Now the good news, and this is actually a complete coincidence. I wrote that whole paragraph and then realized that if you scroll down a little further in the blog post, Microsoft has become self-aware enough that it is adding back the revolutionary never combined mode to Windows Insiders for the dev channel. Microsoft giveth and taketh away, and then giveth again and makes it a new feature that it can market on, make everyone happy temporarily until it takes away the next feature to then give back later to overcome some other problem that it created on its own that it didn't need to create. Up next, something pretty cool in tech news, supercomputers. The Aurora supercomputer is complete now. We actually covered this when they started the plans for it and the construction on it in 2015. The Aurora supercomputer is at the Argonne National Laboratory, and this features over 10,000 compute blades with 63,000 Intel Data Center Max GPUs, 21,000 Max CPUs, totaling 1.1 million cores. It takes up 166 racks across 8 rows inside the lab's data center. This thing might even be more powerful than InWind's Chandelier build, but we're not sure it's that close. Each individual blade has 2 CPUs and 6 GPUs and weighs 70 pounds. That's enough to make even Jensen Huang blush.
Even this is incredibly heavy.
They're all liquid glycol cooled and are fed from a complicated building scale system. Those red and blue hoses that you see, those are the hot and cool sides, respectively. Aurora also has 220 petabytes of capacity. Projections estimate that it'll be the first supercomputer to cross over the 2 exaflop compute threshold. This much raw computational power is set to make a difference in all sorts of problems, from disease research to complex climate and weather modeling. Before it's brought fully online, Aurora will be used to train massive generative AI models for science. We assume in this context they said that literally, it meant it's for science, and that the admins aren't just going to be spitting out literally billions of AI cat pictures per second for science. Aurora is set to take the top spot from Oak Ridge National Laboratory's Frontier supercomputer on the top 500 list in a battle that, in this instance, is ongoing as supercomputers continuously try to get to the top of the list. Frontier was put in service in 2021. It has a theoretical peak of 1.6 petaflops of compute while pulling 22,703 kilowatts of power. Power consumption estimates have not been published for Aurora at the time of writing. Interestingly, Aurora was originally going to be built with Intel's Xeon Phi processors, coprocessors, that descended from Larrabee lineage. But delays in those projects led to what we have today. The final story, the Asus ROG Ally has faced its first major performance hiccup, and it's in the form of a BIOS update. You expect changes and updates within the first couple weeks of a device's launch. It's only a few weeks in, but not like this. So version 3.19 was supposed to address a few known bugs with the Asus ROG Ally. Instead, it dropped gaming performance upwards of 20%, according to The Fox on YouTube. Now, we actually just bought one of these. We have it. We started working on it this week. And what we've learned is that BIOS Update 3.19 can apply itself automatically through the My Asus software malware that's pre-installed on the system. And it's ironic considering Asus itself told users to hold off on installing this update for now. So they've said it's a problem, don't install it. And then it gets forced through anyway because it's Asus and they are overbearing with their approach to making sure you get your firmware updates. If the update did get forced installed and you're seeing performance issues, you are able to downgrade back to 3.17 though. Other than that, the Ally seems to be a fairly smooth launch except for battery life. 3.19 BIOS was intended to correct some of that. And again, we're working on it. We have some cool content coming up. And back when the Steam Deck launched, we had a ton of fun testing it because it's different and interesting. We can apply our skill set to something unique, like wiring it up with thermocouples and doing some cool noise testing. So that's all coming up shortly. But for now, we'll just be doing occasional videos plus news over the next few weeks while we continue to refine our test systems and honestly just take a break following Computex. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.
Step right up, Outlander, and look over my collection of scrolls.
AI voices in Morrowind.
Can't wait for this shit.
Welcome to the road to Skyblivion. Now that we have a goal set in place, we'd like to break down where we are at and where we need to travel to get there. In this video, we aim to show you exactly what has been completed and what still remains in order to make our release goal of 2025. Should you feel you have the skills needed to help us achieve that goal, we are always looking for new volunteers. The world spaces. Our landscaping and level design serves as the canvas for players to paint their own stories, so we strive to craft as attractive a world space as possible. Though significant strides have been made on various regions, some require more attention, like the grassy West Weald, snowy Valus and Gerald Mountains, and Nibonese lakes and forests. By doing so, we aim to make the world more captivating to explore and enhance the visual storytelling aspects for which the Elder Scrolls series is so beloved. The land of Cyrodiil is divided into 9 different regions. We start off with the Gold Coast, which recently had all 526 cells landscaped. The Colovian Highlands has all 422 cells landscaped. The Fall Forest and Heartlands region has all 405 cells landscaped. The Great Forest, with its 460 cells, has been fully landscaped in record time. The Gerald and Valus Mountains, with 517 cells, has also been fully landscaped. And the Swamps of Blackwood have all 803 cells completed. Currently, the West Weald is the least polished area, sitting at 43 out of 284 cells, or around 15%. The Niboney Basin also needs work, with 300 out of the 674 cells completed. And the nearby Niboney Valley similarly sits at around 50% completion, with 155 out of 300 cells finished. The Skyblivion world map has a total of 4,391 cells, of which we have completed 3,632, or 82.7%. Beyond the borders of Cyrodiil, and even Nirn itself, lie 40 unique world spaces, from hostile Oblivion realms to painted worlds, dreams, and alternate realities ruled by Daedric princes. So far, we've completed 11 world spaces, with most of the remaining 29 being Oblivion realms, which we're saving for last. Our plan is to use all the knowledge and skills we've gained over the years to make these realms a truly memorable part of the gaming experience. Once a region is complete, the magic of navmeshing can begin. This process involves adding a navigational mesh to the world map, allowing creatures to roam, battle, and follow you. We're currently around a third of the way through this mammoth task. Hasn't been remade. The level design team can't advance in rebuilding that painted world. This process involves adding a navigational mesh to the world map, allowing creatures to roam, battle, and follow you. We're currently around a third of the way through this mammoth task, which means that NPCs and quests are fully functional in those completed parts of the map. This is a quicker process when tackled on a cell-by-cell basis compared to landscaping. If you have some spare time and are interested in lending a hand, the NavMesh team is always looking for new recruits to help speed things along.
Hell yeah, brother.
Now, let's turn to our interiors. We have a whopping 600 interiors, with 260 completed, or roughly 40% of the total. They are divided into categories, including castles, unique structures, stables, shops, sewers, mines, inns, homes, forts, chapels, caves, imperial watchtowers, and Ayleid ruins. Of these interior locations, dungeons are by far the most time-intensive, accounting for 220 of the total. That's why our focus has been on completing dungeons like caves, forts, and mines first, with 190 either finished or in progress. The remaining 380 interior locations, like houses, shops, and other smaller locations, take a fraction of the time to complete. And are often tackled in larger batches. Whether you're interested in working on houses or dungeons, we warmly welcome your volunteer application. 3D. From the threads that make up your character's garments, to the lush forest greenery and the birds that soar high above, each 3D object and creature infuses life into Cyrodiil. While many object groups are well underway, some areas create a bottleneck for other departments. For instance, if the architecture set for a city hasn't been remade, the level design team can't advance in rebuilding that area in-game. Furthermore, without recreating all 2,508 of Oblivion's 3D objects from the ground up, we won't meet the required legal standard to release Skyblivion. Our plants and clothes are particularly underdeveloped, and we need extra help in wrapping up this extensive list of assets. We have some 615 objects yet to create. Although some could be borrowed from Skyrim, many of them are not suitable for integration into Skyblivion, so there remains a long list of assets to recreate from scratch. Our 3D team is chugging away, but we always welcome new artists to lend a hand, even in the final stages of development. Quests. In Skyblivion, players can create their own story and make a name for themselves by embarking on the 199 quests available. Out of these quests, 97 are currently playable, 25 are in progress, and 77 still need to be worked on. These quests can be found in various quest lines. Main quests: the Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Thieves Guild, Dark Brotherhood. Side quests: Daedric quests, arena quests, and master training quests. Gameplay systems. Oblivion is renowned for its unique mechanics, many of which are currently operational and in-game. These include the class system, spellcrafting, spells and magic, underwater combat, alchemy, weathers, disposition, and attributes. Additional mechanics may be added in the future. Time will tell. Cyrodiil would never truly immerse the player without Oblivion's iconic music. We are proud to announce that all original tracks have been retained and supplemented with 17 new tracks. Each of the 9 regions has a unique new track, complemented by 3 new dungeon exploration themes. Additionally, the atmospheric music for the Oblivion realms has been updated for an even more absorbing experience. In regards to DLC, our focus is 100% on Skyblivion for now, in order to release the base game at some point in 2025. Once Skyblivion is in your hands, we shall turn our attention to the Shivering Isles and other extra content. We've come a long way since the project began in earnest back in 2016. Having a tangible release goal is amazing and terrifying all at once, but with your help, we are confident we will meet it. If you feel you have the skills to help us breathe new life into Cyrodiil, please consider applying at www.skyblivion.com/volunteer. What started out as a simple side project has evolved into one of the biggest modding projects to date. Despite the massive scope of this project, we are finally seeing the end of the road, and there is still work to be done. We hope this video has given you a better insight into the project, and perhaps has shown how some of you might be able to contribute yourselves. Only with the Elder Scrolls Modern Communities talents,
I wonder if they're gonna have like the Goblin Wars.
This fantastic community, could we have ever gotten as far as we have.
And the other strange mechanics like that.
We hope you continue to support us as you have for years, and we are excited to share much more.
Hell yeah, brother. No Patrick Stewart though. No! Yeah, baby! Dark Brotherhood. The good Dark Brotherhood. The best Dark Brotherhood. The House of Troubles. Can't wait for that shit. Skywind 2 is coming along pretty well.
This is what you want. I know this is what we've all wanted since the release of Morrowind so many decades ago. And I can show you today. All of this, what you're seeing right now, is how things look in-game for me right now. That's right, with just under 40 mods, we can make Morrowind look like this. And I'm gonna tell you two...
Doesn't look that good. Is there like a reshade?
This is what you want. I know this is what we've all wanted since the release of Morrowind so many decades ago. And I can show you today. All of this, what you're seeing right now, is how things look in-game for me right now. That's right, with just under 4
What are the two things that work very well together? Religion and communism. My man, you agree, your name is fitting. Do you agree religion and communism is the best thing together?
Religion, communism?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Communism, but with religion.
Are you saying that's a good thing or a bad thing?
No, I want to ask you if you think that is like a natural thing, like the most common thing.
No, I don't think it is.
Alright, 1 second. Sorry, crossfire.
Hey, Lamel.
Gotta build up our little church here. Who are we gonna worship for? Gotta put our little sign up here. The Church of Lenin Jesus. This looks somewhat like Lenin. We will just put this. We will worship this.
And a mask.
How did you miss? The barrel was in my throat. It was in my throat. It was coming out my eyeball. How are you missing?
Good aim.
Yes. Welcome to the Church of Lenin Jesus. Do you like Lenin or Jesus? Thank you for the donation to the church.
Is this church? I'm going to sit down.
Yeah, this is the Church of Lenin Jesus. Okay. Stop punching me, you monkey. Help me. He's trying to disturb the church.
Fucking get you, bro. I get you, man. Fuck you, bro.
The Swedish. Always very helpful. Thank you. He's lurking outside there. Oh, you wanted to give a donation?
Yes.
Where's the money? You didn't give me any.
No, yeah, fuck it. There you go. No, there you go, man. There you. Yeah. Take it easy. I'm poor, bro. Bro. Please.
Okay, don't worry.
So
Thank you for the donation. 1,000 times what you donated before.
I crashed. Then you neck.
Oh no, it's you again.
No, what the fuck's happening?
Oh, I broke the statue! I broke the statue! You made me do this! He bought my doll! What the hell? Thank you very much for your donation. No homeless people.
I can give you.
Oh no, not you again.
Been arresting a bunch of people for no reason. Why have you been arresting all these people? You arrested this guy and 2 other people within like 40 seconds.
That's my property, boy. Let me go on my property.
Well, I've arrested the same 2 people. What do you mean? I think you're just making up bullshit right now.
Yeah, same 2 people, yeah.
Yeah. Quickly changing the story. What's next? I stole money from Uganda.
I mean, can I warn you for RDA times 3? Because you arrested 3 people for no reason.
I arrested 2 people.
No, you arrested 2 people because it was him twice, but
Yeah, does that make him 2 people? Does he
still...
know if a personality disorder that he splits into 2? I think the Church of Lenin Jesus will have to move soon. Because I'm not gonna stop arrest. There he is again. Get off my church. It's you, Tommy. Hi.
Hello. I see you've realized your dream.
Yeah, it's not going well, those. We got some problems with the higher-ups here. They're kind of against us removing unwanted people from church grounds. Wanna donate by any chance to our man and savior, Lenin? And $69. Thank you very much. 1 second. Unwanted. No property in this state.
Thing to donate.
Oh, it's you again!
You're breaking NLR. So first of all, you're breaking NLR. Second of all, you're mass kidnapping. So shut the fuck up.
Cool, mate. Jesus fucking Christ.
Man keeps on fucking breaking NLR.
Just go fuck yourself, generally, mate. Get a fucking life. You're breaking NLR and you're mass kidnapping.
Yo, whoa. Wait, that was. Oh wait, no, was that the correct guy? Did I just arrest for correct guy? No, that was you.
There's gonna be one for.
You.
Do you only want him for the same situation? It's the same situation then.
Yeah, it's the same situation. Can I please get the warn removed?
No, you want to warn him because he did it again.
No. Same situation. We can return it. No, we can return. Everyone return. Have a good day, everyone. Why was I just warned for RD8? I'm going down with this ship.
Elon Musk! Again!
Hi. Welcome back. Alright, so that is the same situation. I think he just reported me again.
I'll jump into my PC. Oh my god, I'll do backflip.
this kid is not mentally well, and all allegations against me are fault. He's gonna ban me for being Jewish. Can you believe it? Third active IRDA. I don't think that's true. Alright, next server. I think this guy wants to give up his building for the greater good. We just need to go in and convince him. Hi there. You wanna give up your building, I heard? We need it for our church. I'm sorry, but you have to delete everything, buddy. It's not my decision. Oh, what the hell do you want from me? What did I do to you? What did I do to you?
What do you say about my mother?
Nothing!
What do you say about my mother?
Okay, I think you don't need church. I think you need therapy.
Can I have both?
I mean, yeah. Alright, time to put the Lenin statue. What? Okay, unacceptable. Hi!
Hey.
Welcome, fellow followers of communism. Today we're gonna talk about Lenin's letter to Joseph Tito. He said, oh, never mind, we're getting some help here. That prop, we need it enabled. I'm sorry. It's necessary for our church.
I can't do anything about that.
No, we need it in... Okay, can you remove those walls, then? Someone placed those walls for no reason. Can you please remove your walls? Okay. I guess he doesn't want to remove the walls. Come sit down, Lemon. Our lecture is still going on about Lenin. He wrote of him, my great comrade Tito, together we will crush the capitalists who will buy buildings and pretend they belong to them when in reality they're church ground. Are you dropping your trash? Stop placing stuff in the church! Alright, he wrote, we will crush the capitalists of Gmod and together we will achieve freedom for all people. He also said we're gonna give all money to the church. Alright, I think we just made him very screen. He left! Devout follower. Good. You're getting into this. I can already see we're growing in numbers, people. Slowly we will crush the concept of private property on the server. Lemon, please come to the front and speak about why you joined the church.
I've had a lot taken from me over the years. People saying that they own the building, and it's not right. We need to take it all back. Everything is for the people.
That's why I became hobo, so I could be one with everything.
We don't need buildings.
I mean, we kind of need the buildings for our church. That's why we kind of took it over. Okay, you're just gonna put plants everywhere. Okay, maybe this is going a different kind of communism than I wanted it to be. No, are you gonna? Oh no.
I think that made it perfect.
Maybe I might have been wrong about opening this church.
You can't change your mind now, you're too deep into it. We are all for eggplant now, religion has changed course. Yes.
What? No, we're for communism, and Jesus.
Plant this place up.
I don't remember holding a vote on whether we should change to eggplants.
You're being outvoted.
As a kid growing up in the 90s, I feel like I got to experience the peak of that whole VHS era, and in particular, the influx of super violent, mature-themed anime that got released in Australia. Most of which, as a kid, I probably shouldn't have been watching. Things like Ninja Scroll, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, and Madball 34. All chock full of gorgeous, hand-drawn animation, graphic violence, and badass main characters. And it's kind of weird to think too that that's a vibe that's just not that common to see in gaming, especially when it comes to first-person shooters. Well, that's all about to change with the upcoming mullet Mad Jack. A fast-paced shooter that feels like a combination of post-Void and everything great about late 80s and early 90s anime, where you play as a seriously buff dude sporting an outright impressive Mississippi mudflap. Yeah man, this guy's all business in the front, party in the back. And it's a scientific fact that mullets make someone approximately about 300% more manlier. Just ask Solid Snake, Macho Man Randy Savage, or Jerry Seinfeld.
It's not a purse! It's European!
Now, before I get started, I do want to make it clear that this isn't a sponsored video. I mean, that should be obvious, but I'm not being paid by the devs to talk about this, and I'm not receiving any kind of kickback either. I was just lucky enough to get a sneak peek at the alpha build that they're releasing on Steam pretty soon. And it was just one of those instances where I played something that was so much fun that all I wanted to do was share it with other people.
Jesus. Guys. Gotta stop.
Dear God, it's beautiful. Every time I think I'm done with the indie shooter scene, another one comes out that just pulls me right back in. This time it's for Trepang 2, a gory, action-packed FPS set in the distant future and developed by the aptly named Trepang Studios. I played through the demo for this thing like 3 or so years ago, and you didn't need to spend that much time playing through that early build to see that they were definitely onto something pretty good. The easiest comparison to make here is with the Fear series, and there's no doubt that this is the primary game that Trepang 2 takes influence from. You know, in case the whole super soldier with insane reflexes fighting back against paranormal threats wasn't the obvious giveaway. Instead of the ambiguously named Point Man, you're playing as the ambiguously named Subject 106. And instead of going up against Armorcam Corporation, it's one called Horizon. Much like the Point Man, Subject 106 also has heightened sensors. Now, in Fear, that was called Reflex Mode, and over here in Trepang, it's called Focus. The only advantage that 106 has over the Point Man is that this guy's also got a cloaking device, like he's wearing a knockoff nanosuit from Crysis. It's also got a lot of similar themes, like the whole mysterious backstory for your character, going up against shady, corrupt corporations, along with scientific experiments gone wrong, with the player being smack bang in the middle of the whole thing and dealing with it the only way they know how. Holy moly. And if this is all sounding pretty good so far, don't forget you can grab the game through my GOG affiliate link, which I'll put in the video description. And if it's ever on sale, it should offer up a tidy discount on whatever that discounted price already is. And in terms of just the raw gunplay and the shooting alone, Trepang 2 might honestly have some of the best gunplay I've ever seen in an FPS. I mean, just in the way that weapons sound and feel, and the sheer carnage you can create during combat, this really is about as good as it gets. The feedback you get when using a shotgun or a grenade launcher and seeing the utter devastation in glorious slow motion is something that's been carried across here just flawlessly. You've got all those various particle effects from weapons and grenades. There's blood, dust, smoke, and fire, and it all looks amazing. Plus, that filter they've used when you activate focus to really emphasize your heightened senses really makes you feel like you're in the cockpit of this genetically engineered super soldier. Enemy chat is also really cool. The way that enemies almost hysterically shout to each other during combat totally captures the fear that you'd expect from someone when a superhuman killer is sliding around at breakneck speeds and brutally murdering their buddies one by one. So, at its most basic form, yeah, it's just a really competent first-person shooter. For weapons, you've got the pistol, shotgun, SMG, assault rifle, DMR, grenade launcher, and then the bolt launcher. And what's kind of great about most of these is that none of them ever really seem to become redundant. I mean, even the pistol is still pretty decent, even late game, as long as you're going for headshots. And the grenade launcher, I mean, that thing's always going to be useful, just as long as you're not breathing down someone's neck when you're firing.
I appreciate what you're showing me right now.
Following in the footsteps of Fear's VK-12 is Trepang 2's Spaz-12, a weapon that just becomes an outright war crime and can kill most standard enemies in a single hit. It's easily one of the best weapons in the whole game, and if you don't spend a significant amount of your playtime here using it, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're playing the game wrong. And the fact you could get through the majority of the campaign using this thing alone shows you how good it is. Likewise with the SMG, which looks to be based off of Vector. It's a fast-firing, hard-hitting little gun that never stops being all kinds of awesome. I actually think I prefer it to the assault rifle, simply because of the higher fire rate, which takes me back to my days of playing Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer and cheesing through lobbies with that rapid-fire attachment. The DMR, on the other hand, is probably one of the least effective weapons, only because a weapon like that's really meant for long-range gunfights, and you don't really have too many of those in the campaign. And as for the bolt launcher, well, I just never really had that many instances when it was more effective to use it over something else. And the fact that it fires 3 shots at once, combined with that low ammo count, just turned me off using it even more. I mean, as a point of comparison, the grenade launcher, also has a pretty low ammo count. But then, on the other hand, the destruction you can cause with that thing, it's not even in the same league as the bolt launcher. It's not even the same sport. And then finally there's a minigun, which again, I didn't find all that useful because it's got this insanely slow wind-up time to the point that it almost feels like a bit of a handicap. Grenades also play a pretty big part in the combat as well, and again there's a few different types here, from impact grenades to flashbangs and even proximity mines. And hitting someone dead on with a frag grenade is more or less going to teleport them to the goddamn Shadow Realm. Holy moly. The only thing I noticed there was that the hitboxes are pretty damn inconsistent, and I don't know what's going on here, but the amount of times I've thrown a grenade at someone and it seemingly just goes right through them, it's too many to count. Even when it seems to actually hit someone, it still doesn't blow up. And look, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I just assumed that impact grenades would, explode on impact. Wrong! I like to think that I have pretty good game sense and muscle memory for throwing grenades in, FPS games, but half the time my throws here just seem to miss entirely. Yeah, mistakes were made. But all in all, regardless of the weapon you're using, the shooting is top tier stuff. And Subject 106 is really a bit of a nasty piece of work if you're playing right. You can grab enemies and use them as human shields, and using this mechanic in tandem with the cloak, it becomes pretty easy to just run behind someone and pick them up and use them as your very own bullet magnet, snapping their neck like a pretzel stick when they've outserved their usefulness. You've got a melee punch and a kick move as well, and if you jump kick enemies at close range, it even propels you backwards, leaving them stunned and wide open for a face full of bullets. There's that gravity-defying slide move, which really never gets old. And this thing launches enemies up into the air, and if you're quick enough, you can slide into someone and then grab them in midair. This is the move I probably use the most, and I just never really got sick of slow motion sliding into a group of bad guys and gunning them all down before I'd even lost momentum. I think there's going to be some pretty filthy montage videos on YouTube of people absolutely exploiting this mechanic, you know, assuming there's not a heap of them already. So yeah, it's really one of those kind of shooters where you get out what you put in. And if you just run around with the assault rifle and shoot enemies from a distance without ever using focus, your cloak, or any of those other moves, well, you're almost kind of doing yourself a disservice. First, I kind of hated how you have a stamina bar, but after a while, I actually kind of started to appreciate it because each kill gives you a boost in stamina, and that idea right there is what encourages you to play more aggressively and really push the enemy's position. The lack of a lean button or even being able to aim down sights for better accuracy does seem like a bit of an oversight, but when you think about it in relation to the stamina system, it's something that's also probably been done for similar reasons. Because otherwise it'd probably be too easy just to hang back and peek at people from around corners like you're a camping sweat lord in Rainbow Six Siege. About halfway through the game, you unlock the ability to dual-wield weapons, which is just so overpowered that there's no real reason to not dual-wield as much as possible. I don't know why you had to find a super serum to just be able to hold a gun in each hand, but it's probably just been done to gatekeep that mechanic early on, because otherwise you just steamroll through those earlier missions. But you know what? I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, especially when that gift horse lets you wield 2 pump-action shotguns and magically reload each of them without losing a beat. At one point you can even get incendiary rounds, which are more or less like Dragon's Breath shells. Yeah, I guess someone saw John Wick 4, hey? And the visual spectacle of firing these in slow motion, it's just ludicrous. But then dual wielding these things makes it even more insane. And if you want, you can even take it that little bit further and dual wield grenade launchers. At which point you pretty much just become death, destroying worlds. Visually too, Trepang 2 just looks awesome at times. The modelling for all the weapons is really accurate and lifelike, and some of the environments are really striking to look at with a lot of good variety. Kind of reminds me a lot of those locations you'd see in like a finale in a John Wick film, where it's like these architecturally unique environments where strong lines combine with harsh light. One of the missions in the Pandora Institute, for instance, features the kind of environments that go beyond just being window dressing and are just downright artistic. And then the violence and the gore is just on another level. It's common to leave rooms strewn with the body parts of your fallen enemies, and you'll see intestines flying out during nasty explosions, and at one point I even saw someone's brain. Gets to the point where after heavy combat, you're literally just covered in blood and, yeah, not your own.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
The best looking effects are when you destroy like paper or wood, and watching a bunch of shit like that blow up in slow motion is like an orgasm for your eyes. A lot of these darker underground areas feature really impressive dynamic lighting, with light shining through fences and other materials to give it this real dithered look. And it's just another one of those instances where it really seems like the UE4 engine has been put to good use, mostly. Now I say mostly only because the amount of environmental interaction is kind of inconsistent, and outside of those destructible surfaces which can always be blown apart, it does seem like a lot of the props in the game world are more or less just completely nailed down. And it will never cease to amaze me how, despite engines being so much more advanced these days, that physics engines just peaked back in the early to mid 2000s and they've just never developed from that. So it's just a shame that despite Trepang 2 looking pretty damn good across the board and having a high level of detail, that level of detail didn't carry across to the physics for every single little element. One thing I'll say too is that the music and the dialogue mixing is just all over the place, with these loud, overbearing metal tracks playing during almost every single combat encounter, often being so deafening that it cancels out the radio chatter entirely.
What did he say?
I gotta say too, like, I just don't think the music fits all that well with the combat, and when you compare it to the minimalistic soundtrack we got in a game like Fear, for instance, it just makes that even more apparent. you can always just turn their music down if you want to, which I'd actually probably recommend, because it just sounds like the kind of thing on an edgy 15-year-old's MySpace page. But look, either way, if all you signed up for here was a gloriously violent shooter that encapsulates the term gun porn, well, look no further, bitch. However, people who were hoping that the whole thing would be brought together by a cohesive campaign with a story that actually makes sense are probably going to be disappointed. Because this campaign, it's just kind of a mess. And it really begs the question, is good gunplay enough?
How about new?
Things start off pretty good, at least with an opening level, which is without a doubt the highlight for the entire campaign. Starts off showing 106 being held in some kind of remote, top-secret laboratory, being forced to watch what I assume is some kind of subliminal programming, before then getting set free by a mysterious figure who quickly vanishes. You're then on the loose and trying to make your escape, soon finding the keys to your handcuffs and a basic weapon to defend yourself with. Then from there, it's a series of really intense shootouts in these dimly lit interior environments, fighting back against this militaristic force that really doesn't want you to escape. And the reason is because you really are this super dangerous hidden away experiment that really can't be unleashed on the world. It's also a bit of a good tutorial to how the combat works with your two basic abilities, Focus Mode and that Cloak. Focus Mode, of course, just being your standard bullet time mechanic, slowing everything down around you, but allowing you to move more or less in real time, giving you that much needed advantage over your enemies. And then the Cloak is, well, yeah, Cloak. You go invisible for a few seconds, which is handy for breaking line of sight and leaving the enemy wondering where the hell you've gone. And using the both of those in combination with that slide move, you become pretty much unstoppable and can pretty much bully most of what the game throws at you. You're really intended to be a force of nature here from the get-go. It's like they're trying to give you the sense that you're a wild animal that's been let out of its cage. And you're barely out of your shackles for 2 minutes before you start committing all that crimes against nature on these unfortunate soldiers who are here on cleanup duty. Then after a shootout in an area that can only be described as a bad guy elevator lobby, you're extracted by your mysterious benefactors, that group called the Syndicate, and taken to their secret underground lair in a hollowed out cave. No volcano, sadly. The Syndicate is trying to stop the evil conglomerate named Horizon, which is some kind of global research company involved in private security, scientific research, and defense engineering, among a whole bunch of other shit. In fact, they even made a mock-up website for the company to promote it, which I've got to admit is a neat little touch. So yeah, like off the bat, it sounds like an interesting premise, and you expect to deal with lots of twists and turns along the way, right? Unsure of who you're going to be able to trust in this dark and depressing world. Only as soon as you first get to that Syndicate safe house, you'll notice how much the place echoes. And the reason for that is that aside from the soldiers in
Fuck, dude. Hmm. Why is he giving me only pictures?